Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Mitigating Cyber Risk Through People, Securing the Human Stack. This event is brought to you in partnership with VIPRE and produced by Actual Tech Media. Now, before we jump into it, first I want to thank you for joining today's special webinar. We've got a great event lined up for you, a very educational topic today and a very timely topic because I know so many companies are being hit with ransomware threats and cyber attacks. So this is just perfect timing for this topic. My name is David Davis of Actual Tech Media, and I'll be serving as your moderator on today's presentation. We want this to be an educational event for you out there in the audience. I know, like I said, many of you are struggling with cybersecurity, and this is a great event to get answers to all of your questions. On the left-hand side of your audience console right there, you'll find the questions tab. I can call your attention to it now, and I see lots of hello and welcome messages from across the United States and around the world, so thank you for those. But we also encourage your security challenges there in the questions box, and we'll be doing our best to cover those during our dedicated Q&A session. We also have a couple of handouts I want to call your attention to. They are the VIPRE Security Awareness Training Solutions Brief. You can find out that there in the Handouts tab. If you download that now, you can check it out after the event. And the experts at VIPRE have also generously created a justification letter that you can download. It's actually really cool to help you justify security awareness training at your company. It's very fill in the blank, and it'll make it super easy for you to justify the value of security awareness training for not just for your IT organization, but for the entire company, for the security of the entire company and compliance as well. So I encourage you to download that resource, and our presenter will be talking about it during his presentation as well. And then finally, if you're watching this event live, we'll be announcing the winner of our Amazon $300 gift card at the end of today's webinar. If you're watching this on demand, I'm sorry the drawing has already occurred. The prize terms can be found there in the Handouts tab. And with that, I'm excited to introduce you to today's expert presenter. That is Mr. Jason Norton, Product Marketing Director at VIPRE. Jason, thank you for being on.
Hi, David. Thanks for having me. It's great to be back.
It's great to be chatting with you again about this really hot topic. Excited to hear your presentation. Take it away.
Okay, thanks. And thanks, everybody, for joining us this afternoon, or depending on where you're sitting. We appreciate your time and hope that you find this informative. So let's kick off. Again, I'm Jason Norton. I'm the Product Marketing Director at VIPRE. And for those that don't know, I just wanted to do a quick recap of who we are. Who is VIPRE? Well, to start off, VIPRE is actually an acronym. It's Virus Intrusion Protection Remediation Engine. So we'll get that one out of the way, and that's why VIPRE is capitalized if you're not familiar with our company and why it's spelled that way. That goes back to, way back to our inception about 25 years ago in '94 when we came up with the name. That's how VIPRE was born. And so with that, we've had quite a journey in the 25 years and created a portfolio of protection along the way, where we started out as an anti-spyware company and had the first commercially available sandbox. We kind of moved into the natural progression of endpoint security, which of course brought us to email security, and then we've expanded our portfolio into user and data protection. And of course, you can always find out more about VIPRE by going to vipre.com at any time. So with that, let's kind of talk about today's discussion points. And David, you said it at the outset. This is very timely, particularly with the work from home situation of the past several months. But this is a subject that has really gained traction in the past, I'd say 36 months, and the subject matter of security awareness training, that is. And if only it were as easy as the slide, we'd be out of here. It would be a short presentation. Just don't do anything stupid, right, David? I think those are probably the best words to live by, but it's not that easy. And we'll talk about why it's not that easy and why it's not necessarily all the end user's fault with the sophistication of some of the malware and the phishing campaigns that we see kind of on a daily basis. And we'll touch on that. We'll talk about the state of security, cybersecurity for small and medium-sized businesses, outline and discuss the main drivers for security awareness training, or what I might refer to as SAT for ease of reference as we move throughout. What are the three main organizational drivers for security awareness training? How do you build the case if it isn't kind of intuitively known, and maybe should be, that this is something that would benefit the entire organization? We'll go a little bit deeper into why IT does own security awareness training and touch on the challenge of often selling it upstream. It wouldn't be uncommon for the IT department or the security admin to see the acute need for security awareness training for the organization, particularly if they're answering help desk tickets. They know full well what security awareness training could probably do to their own workload. How do you sell that upstream? How do you get buy-in from the other stakeholders? And then lastly, I'll touch on, before the Q&A, just some kind of current COVID scams, smishing and vishing, what that is and why it's important, and why security awareness training should be modern enough to touch on the modern aspects of the sophisticated phishing campaigns that are pervasive today. Okay, so with that, we'll move on. Just a reminder that the SMBs face a threat landscape that was only known before to previous, call them big box stores like Target. Well, now it's the SMBs that are the targets because they're perceived as low-hanging fruit. So the challenge for SMBs is to react to some of the sophistication and the malware campaigns that they're faced with every day, but to do so with a limited budget, to do so with limited personnel, and sometimes limited know-how, because they could be a jack of all trades in some small businesses, and oftentimes are. But with 57% of SMBs reporting a phishing attack last year, that's an awful lot of SMBs that are experiencing phishing, and those are obviously known events. I would guess that would be a much higher number from the unknown phishing attacks that went unreported. So we'll dig into why that's such a challenge for end users, managers, and business owners alike. Talk about the pervasive phishing campaigns a little bit more, and really how that ties into business email compromise and how those are one and the same, and how security awareness training takes care of the business email compromise side, kind of meets the technology of an email security product that would take care of some of the pervasive phishing campaigns and the bad links associated with those campaigns. We'll talk about how security awareness training holistically addresses that. And then we should also remember that the threats to the entire organization have grown in sophistication and frequency. So we've heard about whaling, probably, right? Trying to go for the sea level, or instead of phishing, let me go for a bigger one and call it whaling. So it makes sense. But when we look at accounting or supply chain attacks, those are going to be sophisticated. Oftentimes, the bad actor has done reconnaissance and social media investigation into associates at your firm, and these campaigns can be very difficult to stop in your supply chain with perhaps fake invoices or accounts payable. Supply chain gets breached. So there's real big challenges for small and medium-sized businesses in today's threat landscape. Where do the threats come from? I'm going to cite the same study that I cited on the last slide with the Ponymon State of Cybersecurity Survey. And this ended in last year. There'll be one, this year coming out as well. But what I want you to take away is the cyber attacks and data breaches over 17, 18, and 19. And then on the right-hand side is figure 2. And you can see that phishing and social engineering tops out the percentage at 53%. Now, it's also interesting to note that these are organizations with headcount below 100 up to 1,000. I know that might sound a bit weird, below 100 and up to 1,000. So really that's saying, 5 up to 1,000. Really the S and the M in SMB. In VIPRE, we tailor to SMBs. Our platform is tailor-made for SMBs, and also for admins that are stretched out and need to do more with less. So we can appreciate these size companies. Further, the phishing and social engineering, web-based attacks, general malware, the top three are really what's coming in from phishing campaigns, from business email compromise, and then web-based attacks are obviously online threats, all of which need to be addressed with security awareness training because all of those are behavioral based in nature. Okay, so we'll touch on that. So kind of without further ado, now that I've set the stage with some of the backdrop about why this is important, or what the current landscape is, let's talk about why it's important. And users need education. So that's the very first point that I want to talk about. And what we have to remember is that not all jobs are technical. Not everyone can be expected to understand today's risks. So while I might be a more technical user, and I would venture to guess that David's a good technical user as well, but that's just not the case with everybody. So users do need education, and most users aren't even aware of the risks that they face. That's part of the challenge and the disconnect between a security admin or a network admin that is acutely aware of the risks that they face, where the end user is absolutely disconnected. Security awareness training brings a bridge to that gap. Well, if users need education, then there must be the end user factor. And this is really no offense to end users, because they oftentimes don't know any better. But the end user factor means that users will prompt the majority of threats that the security organization sees on a daily basis. So most of these are people problems. Most of the threats that SMBs and organizations worldwide face are people problems, and I call it the end user factor. Every bad link that's not clicked on, every file that's not run is one last chance for a threat to succeed. And if we can mitigate the end user factor, we can mitigate the sheer amount of threats that will potentially run through our organization at any time. Better behavior, less to remediate, and we've hedged the end user factor. So that brings me to point number 3, which David touched on at the outset. I heard him say that work from home is particularly a challenge now with everything from the network going and expanding to being geographically dispersed, to having to cut folks' work computers, and the trepidation that comes with having everybody outside of the network and not being able to monitor as well as one would want to some of the web behavior and usage. So the increased risks that are faced work from home when it comes to the end user or an employee or an individual is they're more isolated. And usually there's less security in place if somebody is working from home than if that individual would be working from the office. So that's a dangerous combination of feeling isolated and not being able to lean on your neighbor for any kind of behavior or questions that you might have if you should open a certain email or if something looks fishy. That's gone, and you're kind of on your own. And users are just less security minded and less informed. So working from home really just amplifies the need for security awareness training so that those folks can guide themselves through some of the questions that they might have. And when we talk about end users and that they can be problematic, and it sounds a bit cruel in a way, but phishing has evolved. And so I guess what I mean is it's really not the fault of the average end user. And to take it a step further, it's not even the fault of an advanced user sometimes. And I mentioned earlier that there's a merging or an intersection of technology and human security awareness training. And phishing has evolved to the point where you need both. So you need the ability to have your email security product have click time protection. And what that means is that after the URL has been rewritten an hour or two after the campaign has made it through all the other spam filters, that's when the bad guys are weaponizing those URLs. And so you need click time protection, which VIPRE provides. That's the aspect of the technical, but what about the security awareness training, the aspect of the human? We can only mitigate so much, but without any phishing training at all, then you're not stopping 100% of the phishing emails that you'll get. So the idea here is that phishing has evolved to the point where you can't expect the end user to catch everything, but the days of the Prince of Nairobi or whatever those real old school original scams were, those aren't around anymore. You can't catch a phishing campaign anymore really by misspellings or bad grammar. The cyber attackers are well beyond that, and the bottom line is phishing has evolved, and the bad guys have upped their game. Okay, so then moving on to the next point. Why is it important? The prevalence of whaling. This is something that I touched on, and I'll go over briefly. But it's not only bad files, bad links that we have to guard against. The idea that malicious users will exploit users, average employees, in other ways, and that would be to gather information. And that's really what the context of whaling is. So it could be intelligence of a higher up, C-level or manager, and then the campaign is created around tricking the average user to give up information on the end target, which could be that accounting target that I talked about earlier. But that's the idea of whaling. And then finally, the ransomware proliferation. And that is that this is an enormous risk that can obviously cause extensive damage within an organization. Ransomware is typically the end game to any kind of phishing campaign, and whether that is to inject malware that will live off the land or lie dormant until another piece of the puzzle comes together and executes, or whether it's a bad link that executes right away. It's really all towards the same end, and that is ransomware, and that is it's for money. So this has become a big business, and it's considered organized crime, and it's also oftentimes bad actors from state-sponsored actors. But today we're going to focus on more of the domestic side, and these are campaigns that it doesn't take much know-how to really put together a phishing campaign. The good news is with the good security awareness training program, you're going to be able to really better inform your users on what to look for. And with a proper layered security stack, the technology will do the rest. Let's dive into why organizations are adopting security awareness training in the first place. I mentioned at the outset that there's three main organizational drivers that I see and that I see in the industry. And the first one should be obvious, and that's to safeguard company revenue. The second one may be less obvious, but it's to increase compliance, and we'll look at that. And then finally, and I think probably the most nuanced, but to improve ethics and culture within a business. And this is something that should be rolled in, and I'll show you how into an overarching security awareness training program, how to roll in the ethics and the cultural training and diversity awareness training into security awareness training. Okay, and as you can see with that stat, phishing and social engineering are the most common cyber attacks by SMBs across the globe. Doesn't matter where you are, it's the most prevalent of all attacks. So let's talk about that first driver, safeguarding company revenue. This is the name of the game. And if you don't believe me, well, you only have to ask yourself, what is the end game of the cyber criminal? Well, we know that's typically ransomware or some sort of locking of files or taking of data to hold hostage for a payment, upon which they'll either return the data or provide some sort of encryption key, upon which time you should get your information and your data back. So how can security awareness training safeguard company revenue? Well, training employees on what to look for reduces business risk carte blanche. Day one, the business risk of any business goes down as security awareness training is introduced, because that awareness begins and the person in the enlightenment into the security awareness begins. Now, a good security awareness training program, and as I talk today, I will say that VIPRE does have a security awareness training program too. And when I talk about looking for, some of the caveats here, I'll unabashedly say that VIPRE checks these boxes, okay, as we move along. So, but whether it's VIPRE or any good security awareness training that's worth its salt is going to be able to establish a baseline for each employee. How do I understand my risk groups? We talked about not every job being technical. How can I possibly measure across my workforce who is technical and who's a ticking time bomb? Well, that's going to be the baseline that's established, and there's different names for it, but all solutions that are good should do the same thing, and that is to test your users to get a baseline. And of course, like I said, VIPRE does do baseline testing to identify those risk groups first. And that just makes sense, doesn't it? Because you need to know where to start, and the efficacy of a program for security awareness training is going to be important to make sure it's working. And within that reporting, you need to be able to see who are the potential risk groups and who are the riskier people that might need more attention. Okay, so phishing training and simulation show employees what to look for. That helps safeguard the company revenue right away because you're exposing folks to phishing simulations. You're also training folks on examples, more of a static example of phishing attempts. And the only way to use a sports analogy to get any better is to take at bats. If you don't have any bats, you can't be expected to get a base hit. And so for your end users, they've got to have at bats before they're expected to get their base hit, meaning they need to be exposed to some phishing simulations, which are provided with VIPRE security awareness training and others. That's a cornerstone of security awareness training, is to do a phishing simulation when the workforce isn't kind of prepared for it, to help you with that baseline, and then to try to group together folks that are higher risk. Moving on to the second bullet within safeguarding company revenue is a business email compromise. I already touched on accounting, vendors, supply chain, so I'm not going to dwell too much here. I also talked about whaling and spear phishing, but I did want to mention data loss protection. When you look at email security, and something that VIPRE has in its portfolio to complement our VIPRE email security solution is designed to prevent email misdeliveries. Well, why is this part of security awareness training? Because you have to watch what's going out as well as guard what's coming in. Phishing campaigns are coming in, hence your inbox, whereas data loss protection is going out. Data loss is going out the door. But you still have to train your employees on how not to make those mistakes. Oftentimes, they're just fat fingers, meaning it's an autofill. Instead of Mike A, it went to, Mike B. It was just an autofill mistake, but the problem was I had my budget spreadsheet or my P&L statement on there, and I can't get that back. Or I had some proprietary information, I can't get that back. So in addition, we talk about, again, the intersection of technology and user behavior. Think about data loss protection and make sure that you're not allowing that to exfiltrate. And consider it part of a security awareness training, how to safeguard your users to have the ability, and you can do that with data loss protection software like VIPRE SafeSend, for example. One example would be you would enter, let's say, a social security format. So, it would be character, dash, and it would have flagged that. And it would have said, are you sure you want to, essentially send this P&L statement? And the user could say, whoops, I don't want to do that. So it's a combination, again, folks, of technology and user behavior to come up with the best result. But keep an eye on DLP and all three of these tenets as we move on to the second driver. Increase compliance. Now, at the risk of losing everybody on this slide, because compliance makes me shiver, compliance is something that most companies have shied away from, don't want to deal with. But at the end of the day, it's something that has to be considered. And although the GDPR was something that sent fear down most people's spines, it's here now. And we're going to have to deal with it. We need to become more compliant, and we've lagged I think the U.S. has lagged a bit behind Europe in some of those standards. So in my opinion, and as a general consumer, it's good to see that, for example, the CCPA, or the California Consumer Privacy Act, is coming along and has actually been instituted for a month or so out in California. But that's considered the template to draw from for the rest of the state legislation and otherwise. And the California Consumer Privacy Act, is pretty much as strict as the GDPR. And why this maps back to security awareness training is because it's not optional to be compliant now. There's fines, and back to the caveat number one, safeguarding company revenue. We can't be paying fines out the door for compliance mistakes. And the HIPAA and HITECH Acts should be considered required training in a security awareness program. And oftentimes this has been training that organizations have given their employees, but it's been disparate training. Maybe it's something that human resources rolled out kind of off and on, and maybe wasn't able to manage properly, I suspect. But this is something that now belongs in the IT department, and we'll go over why that is. But to increase the compliance is really a cornerstone of the security awareness training. And as you can see from the third bullet, it goes so far as to federal and state, which is good for sales organizations who work with state, local, and education to perhaps get some of that finer tuned training, and then state and local compliance. So to increase compliance and to show a duty of care as an organization that you've trained your folks to be compliant, should you ever need to prove it as an organization, is critical. And then to move on, I mentioned improve ethics and culture, and I am a believer that this should be under the umbrella of security awareness training. And not only that, but within the past several months, we've seen a conscious shift, I think, almost in a global mindset of inclusion. And I can speak personally for the organization of VIPRE and J2 Global immediately, was part of the solution and rolled out bias and diversity training, which I thought was fantastic that they introduced it. It was great training. And so the cultural awareness and inclusion training does belong in a security awareness training program, and that's something you should strive to have included. Business ethics is also an important driver in organizations, because along the same veins of data loss protection, which I mentioned, you have to consider insider threats and fraud. And for those would-be fraudsters or data exfiltrators or bad apples in any organization, the first step into kind of dissuading that behavior is to train them that you're watching for that behavior, that you've trained the organization that is, illicit behavior. Okay, so it immediately sets a precedent that won't be tolerated, and then it's kind of known to exist. I talked about DLP, and then just to close out this thought, I caught a recent Forbes article that did cite a global growing adoption rate in cultural awareness training, and the idea here is that this improves the workplace, and this makes the workplace better for everybody. When I talked about the agenda about a half hour ago now, I suppose, I mentioned, well, we're going to talk about why IT should own security awareness training. And I mentioned that, well, heck, I've been doing HIPAA training, from HR here now for several years, but I've never been trained on phishing. What's the deal? Well, that's why security awareness training is cybersecurity, guys. That's why it should belong to IT. And there's real technical considerations, such as network and firewall considerations. So, there's going to be phishing simulations that are coming from outside the network. So there's going to be some tweaking of the knobs, if you will, to get the considerations for your network and your firewall. There's going to be some whitelisting with your IDS and the client-side email filters, the server-side email filters, to make sure that those phishing sims get through. And then really reporting and efficacy. IT are the folks capable, and the department that's typically tasked with meaningful reporting, and it's no different here. Matter of fact, it's more acute. And the reason I say that is, if you buy a security awareness training program, for VIPRE, we're going to show you that it works. We're going to prove the efficacy through our reporting, and we're going to map to the end users that need more training and the ones that don't. But efficacy is a critical part of security awareness training. And certainly when we move on to the column in the right, if we're a believer in the IT organization, how do we, make sales a believer, or the other stakeholders in the decision-making process a believer? How do we sell this upstream? Well, I think the first place is to look for the efficiencies that will be driven and the reduction in risk. So we're looking at driving efficiencies with a reduction in help desk tickets. That's a big one. And the ability for a user to be able to hit a button and whether send that to the admin and determine whether or not that was a phishing attempt or not. So the little things that are going to reduce the strain on your help desk. The rest of the benefit comes from users being more aware and having ad hoc instant messages. Hey, can you come look? I can't believe this email. It's kind of weird. Can you come look over my shoulder? Right. And the second bullet, reduce avoidable user errors leading to phishing and ransomware. So this one, I think, is a big driver to selling this upstream. It's the idea that we cannot be the low-hanging fruit. We as an organization can't be the lowest hanging fruit, because those are the organizations that get taken advantage of. We talked about why there's been a shift in going after SMBs compared to big box stores like Target. The big box stores like Target are where the state actors are going. The folks on the other side of the world that are looking for $6, $7, $8 million of ransom. But what about $40,000, $50,000 in ransom from somebody you've never heard of? That is crippling to a small business. And so we need to reduce the threat profile that we as a business occupy. We need to shrink that, that threat vector, the attack surface, whatever you want to call it. And, it goes back to the joke about the two guys that are running from the bear. It says, what are we running from this bear for? It says, I don't have to outrun the bear. I just have to outrun you. And isn't that true about cybersecurity? I just have to be better than you. I just have to be probably a smaller target than my neighbor. And so to reduce the avoidable user errors goes a long way. And that's taken care of with security awareness training within the first several months, of say a year-long program. Okay. I talked about the duty of care, and this is real. It's not just a kind of a whimsy idea of, hey, let's be a better corporate citizen, but this is true duty of care and increased compliance to show any powers that be that there was a real duty of care taken. And this goes a long way to not being the opposite, which is negligent. And with that, it makes a better workplace for all, right? So those are the main drivers that I've seen for security awareness training, why it belongs in IT, a little bit about how to sell that upstream. At the beginning of the broadcast, David said that there were some resources on the left-hand side, and one of those resources is this form letter. And when we talk about selling upstream, I find this to be helpful. And as you can see, this is something that you're probably going to send via email, aren't you? So I put some hot links in here. But hey, this past weekend I came across an article from Gartner Research. So wow, hey, you're doing research on the weekends for Gartner. Boy, I knew we should have hired. We were right for hiring you because you're such a dedicated worker. So this is written with the person that's bringing this letter, taking this letter to the rest of the stakeholders, is somebody who's done the research, looked at the mind share, seen the thought leadership, and says, you know what? I'm buying into this idea that we need security awareness training. Well, okay, now that we know that there's a problem, how do we make a difference? And you can see that I've included some links to help you with that. Not only the Gartner research link, but I provided a VIPRE ebook. And it's not just a regular ebook. This has an ROI calculator, how to calculate return on investment from a security awareness training program. Now, I think that's impressive because security awareness training is tough to quantify And we've done it. So there's an ROI calculator that you'll see when you download this VIPRE ebook. Even if you don't utilize this letter, please visit us at VIPRE.com and check out that ebook, as well as the rest of the collateral that's available to you around all of our products, including security awareness training. We link to the packages. If you've downloaded the PDF, you've seen those packages. And then, of course, more information. VIPRE's happy to sit down and do a good old-fashioned one-on-one demo and proof of concept and open up the course catalog and all that kind of good stuff. So I hope that is helpful, and to the extent that it is helpful, please use that. And then finally, as I wrap up here, said the last agenda item was to go over some of the kind of state of the union, current scams, current events, I guess you'd call it. But work from home, COVID-19, this is still prevalent, even though we've been at it for several months. So COVID-19 phishing scams continue, monetary theft now that there's government payouts to all of us citizens for relief. That creates instant phishing scams to try to capture that check. And so security awareness training that's good, like VIPRE, will have current phishing sims that will be able to reflect the current times. And so COVID being one of those times. Misinformation is a big part of the COVID scams that we're seeing. And it's really unfortunate, but it's characteristic of the cyber criminals. They don't have much of a conscience. If you don't believe me, they've locked up entire hospitals with ransomware. Absolutely unspeakable things to do to people. So really be on the lookout. And the security awareness training program that you go with needs to be topical. And so when I talk about topical, what's smishing and vishing? Well, that's text and voicemail. So that's why it's kind of funny like that. I guess it's kind of intuitive. But why it's important now is with work from home, mobile devices are more prevalent, but yet mobile device management may not be. Certainly if it's not a corporate owned device and it's a BYOD type device. And so the criminals are using the obfuscation that comes with viewing this on a mobile device, as well as leveraging vishing attempts, because folks at work from home are using their personal devices now more than ever. And so increase in bad vishing and scamsters over the phone, because folks are more likely to answer a phone now because they think it's a work call. Okay, so the immediate challenges for IT before we kind of wrap up and get into questions, and I hand it back to David. Corporate laptops and hardware was an immediate challenge past several months. VPN and router security is paramount. VPN access, of course, you need that to drill back into the corporate repository of information. But what I would encourage everybody that's listening is to consider a VPN product that's a business VPN that protects you not only on your own intranet, but browsing at large. So you're tunneled when you're going to CNN or Fox News or ESPN or CBS Sports. Okay, so VPNs go beyond just tunneling back to corporate. Remember that. Router security, change your password. Make sure that your home routers, folks' home routers, are up to snuff and work from home. That's a big challenge. But finally, what these percentages are were extracted from a study that trended, and the bad behavior is still going on in a work from home environment. And what do I mean by that? Well, 56% of employees use a non-work application on a corporate device. 66% have uploaded corporate data to that application. Oh my gosh, I'm getting heartburn. 80% of respondents use their work laptop for personal browsing. That should be no surprise, and it should be accounted for in your security posture. And then finally, 40% always access corporate data from a personal device. And David, as I kind of hand this back to you, those are some startling statistics about the behavior from work from home, and I guess it builds even a stronger case for a good security awareness training program.
That's right. Absolutely. Yeah. Really great presentation, Jason. We've got a lot of good questions coming in. I want to encourage everyone out there, if you have a question about ransomware and security awareness and phishing and vishing and smishing and all these other issues that we talked about today, get it in now. because we're about to start our Q&A session. While we do that, I'm just going to bring up this poll question for everyone out there in the audience that says, what additional information would you like about the VIPRE solution? And we'll just leave that up while we do some Q&A. So Jason, I know there's a lot of good questions in there. I'm going to select some of the ones that catch my eye. If you see any that catch your eye, feel free to interrupt or interject. First one that I saw, they're asking here is, how can you tell if your security awareness solution is actually working? I'm sure that's something that your boss or the executives are going to want to know. Is there some stat that I can look at that tells me that, hey, this thing is making a difference?
That's a good question. And I think that's going to be a common question when you go to sell this upstream. So I'm glad we're covering that. But the efficacy of a security awareness program is going to map back to IT, and when you're rolling out a security awareness training program like VIPRE, for instance, every user is mapped. And so when phishing sims go out and those results come back in, that data is compiled. And as the data gets compiled, there starts to be an emergence of some folks that are better than others. But the efficacy and the effectiveness is usually measured within the phishing sims is the best way to see that behavior quantified.
Okay, that's a great point there. I mean, and I love the letter that you guys came up with here to make it really easy to justify this solution, because I was a former IT manager myself. I've written many a letter, requesting money for something from my boss.
Yes.
And it's tough. It's challenging to do, and you have to research and you have to look at, alternatives and try to put yourself in your boss's shoes or the executive's shoes. So I think that could really make this easy. And I want to, again, remind everyone it's available there in the handouts tab. Next question they're asking here, are training programs all or nothing?
Yeah, that's a good question. And for the person that asked that question, and for everyone else, definitely download the VIPRE Security Awareness Training Solution Brief, because we outline 3 different packages. It kind of succinctly shows that they're not all or nothing, as a matter of fact. So the idea that a 15-person business would have maybe the same needs, objectives, or would utilize the same course catalog as a 500-person business may not be the case. And so it's not all or nothing. And we recognize that at VIPRE. And so we made 3 different packages. An essentials package is just like it sounds. It's just the essentials, and maybe more appropriate for the S and the SMB. And then as you move up the packages to all the way to enterprise, where it's our full course catalog. So it's absolutely not all or nothing, and that's a great question.
And to kind of follow up on that, are there different types of training materials for different types of employees? For example, the executives might need to watch something more or different than just a frontline worker would.
I think any good security awareness training program will recognize that you need to offer training for different and specific groups. And so VIPRE Security Awareness Training does do that. You are able to, for example, have C-level training separate from maybe the floor of a call center that would be great candidates for the general training. So absolutely. And that's a hallmark, again, of a good course catalog. David, when we talk about security awareness training at VIPRE, it's a little bit different than the rest of our portfolio of protection, meaning my endpoint, my email security, right? That's all dots and dashes, bits and bytes, heavy tech. Security awareness training, the courseware is the product. And so it's very important to have a good course catalog and to vet that course catalog out with your vendor partner. But I think that you raise kind of a good point that makes me remind our listeners that when it comes to security awareness training, the courseware is the product. It's a little different.
Very nice. And so another question here is around administering this. I mean, if I'm in IT and I'm rolling this out to 100 or 1,000 users, what's that like? Is this difficult or time consuming to manage from an administrative perspective?
Well, it's not, and by design. The axiom where something that's easy to use, like Apple, cost a bazillion dollars to get it that easy. You know what I mean? Like we worked really hard to make it easy to use. Well, this the same is true with VIPRE security awareness training. So it's the initial setup's easy. Import users from a CSV file. Kind of gets everyone in there. You'll move to an account creation, email, set a couple of things up. So no, it's really not difficult by design to implement the security awareness training program, and that's evidence in our essentials package, right? Where uh, that's our least full, I guess you'd call it, or just the essentials as its name is. So, for example, that would be very easy to set up for the smallest of small businesses. But I've got more information I can provide folks that would either like to get a hold of me or at VIPRE.com with our security awareness training. You're welcome to all the collateral there, folks, of course. But we offer one-on-one demos and would love to understand the challenges of each unique individual organization and kind of talk that out. But to answer your question directly, the initial setup is as easy as it could be.
Okay,
It's
nice.
not hard at all. Yeah.
Are there ways to get your user list into the solutions? Any sort of integrations available?
Yes. Well, so in our enterprise package, there's APIs available, and it's not something that we put in the essentials package because we were mindful, of that group of folks who are most likely to choose that package. So API integration does come with the enterprise package for security awareness training.
Okay, nice.
One thing, David, you could do, for example, would be to hook in to Microsoft an add-in where a user who is suspicious of an email can just hit that add-in, and that's what ships off that email to the admin. That would be one function of that API.
Nice. Yeah. And so to clarify that on that point, actually, there's training, of course, that's the most critical piece of this, but also another critical piece is this simulated attack, these test phishes that you periodically do for the employees who are in this program. Is that true?
The phishing sims are critical to the success of security awareness training because it's really the pop quiz, isn't it? It's the mechanism by which we primarily measure the efficacy, and it's the standard by which you've given a bit of the pop quiz. Like I said, you've trained them what to look for, and then the phishing sim is going to reinforce that.
Got
So,
it.
if that answered your question, yeah, the phishing sims, they need to be realistic. We recommend that they aren't overdone. For example, in our essentials package, there's a total of 6. So that would be every other month, which, in my opinion, is just perfect for that smaller business. Whereas as we move to the advanced package or enterprise, it's unlimited, and that's where you get that flexibility that you mentioned, David, with different groups, different stakeholders, and folks that you would want to treat differently. That's when you can really customize the phishing campaigns to different groups.
Very nice. And to me, that's really the secret sauce. I mean, security training in itself isn't especially magical, but having a software that periodically tests the users to see what they really learned, and then if they didn't learn, to recommend some more training so that they can get better and sharper at recognizing these phishing emails. To me, that's sort of the magical secret sauce on top of this.
Yeah, I'd,
Uh,
I'd have to agree with you. And I should say that our essentials package is great, but to make the leap to the advanced, you really know what you're getting. And you mentioned it, and it's unlimited custom phishing sims. So instead of one every other month for that small business, this gives somebody who's going to go a little more in depth a lot of flexibility with unlimited custom phishing, unlimited USB baiting. I didn't mention that, right? The old USB out in the parking lot, throw a handful down and see who plugs them in. And then I should mention that we do cover vishing and smishing in our advanced package. And I touted that as being important because it's realistic, and security awareness training has to be topical. Security awareness training should be fluid, and our course catalog to that end will be fluid as well, with the latest and greatest training on the latest and greatest scams.
Nice. So are there reports that like managers and auditors could review to know that this has really been done?
There is, yep. There's a full reporting suite, right? So the reporting pulls together all the teaching and testing. So there's a whole intuitive analytics dashboard for VIPRE security awareness training. End user testing records are retained, right? So to your point, that's pretty important, and that's how we can help monitor progress as those records are retained. And then, like I said earlier, I think most importantly about the reporting is your most vulnerable users are automatically identified. So those who score low or frequently fail the phishing sims are those people. And that allows the admins to apply stricter to security caveats to those users as well, right? So it's tangential to the rest of your security posture. But great question, David. It's only as good as the reporting and the proof of the efficacy. And so those are some of the things that VIPRE security awareness training provides.
Nice. Nice. And there was a question in here about, what really makes the VIPRE solution unique out there in the market with an alternative available, let's say. What do you feel that really makes VIPRE stand out?
The courseware. That
Okay.
one's easy for me. It's the courseware. Time was taken to make compelling courseware, knowing that, like I said, that is the product essentially. That is what's under the hood, is the courseware. And the second to the courseware, I think, would have to be flexibility. That not all businesses are the same and have the same needs. So certainly being able to have flexibility within a program. So I would say that the courseware has to be compelling. Those phishing sims need to be realistic. That's a function of your courseware. And then folks that do proof of concepts with security awareness training will see that the wheat from the chaff is kind of easy to separate, because good courseware from bad, focused courseware from general courseware, things like that, not including smishing or vishing, not including current campaigns. So those are the things to look for. You want to look for the opposite: current campaigns, flexibility, and great courseware.
Yeah, you make a great point there. I mean, because you're going to be asking hundreds or thousands of employees to watch this training. Well, hopefully it's good and hopefully it's interesting. So I'm glad that you guys took extra time and put extra effort into making really compelling security training. Another question here, and probably the last one I think we have time for before we wrap up, and that is, how should people get started? What's the easiest way to learn more about VIPRE and perhaps give it a try?
Yeah, VIPRE.com, security awareness training. Request a demo, and that will be the conduit for which a one-on-one will be done with the sales engineer, and answer all the questions and learn about the organization, what the needs are. But that's where we can show how easy the deployment is and kind of back up everything that I talked about, show the courseware, and really open up the program and kind of illuminate what makes VIPRE different. So please visit VIPRE.com and security awareness training, and request a demo. And while you're there, look for our ebook, our data sheets, and all the other collateral, because all the different programs and benefits are listed there as well. So quite a bit of information to be had, and that's how you can get a hold of us. Additionally, David, listeners can always email me as well. And I'm jason.norton@vipre.com.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for answering so many questions and for this really educational webinar and content today, Jason. Thank you so much for being on the event.
Yeah, thank you, David. This was a lot of fun.
And thank you to VIPRE, of course, for supporting today's event. Make sure that you check out the handouts there, the VIPRE Security Awareness Training Solution Brief that breaks down the different tiers and features of the product, and also the really nice justification letter that they have so kindly created, where you can simply fill in the blank to request and justify security training for your company. So make sure you download those resources. Before we go, I want to call your attention once again to the poll that's on the screen. If you haven't answered that poll, now's the time to do it because we are announcing our gift card winner for the Amazon $300 gift card. That is going to Bonnie Shamungam from Texas. Forgive me if I mispronounced your name, but congratulations. I will post the winner there in the questions box as well. I want to thank everyone for taking your time out of your schedule to join us on today's event. For more information on VIPRE, again, make sure you visit VIPRE.com. And of course, you can find them there on all the different social media. Check it out, VIPRE.com. Thank you to everyone for joining us on the event. And once again, Jason, thanks for being here.
Thank you, David. Thanks, everybody.